After a heartbreak drives her to a forgotten Victorian house on the edge of a misty coastal town, Kiera Monroe finds unexpected comfort in its quiet halls, until she realizes she's falling in love with someone who isn't alive. As whispers echo through the walls and secrets rise from the past, Kiera must uncover the truth about the man who haunts her, and decide whether love is worth holding on to, even if it means letting go forever. Hello family, welcome to Storytime with Imzi. Please subscribe and like, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Rain had followed Kiera Monroe all the way from the city, as if it too were trying to leave behind something it couldn't quite name. Her windshield wipers squeaked in tired rhythm as her little hatchback crawled along the narrow, winding road leading into the coastal town of Marrow's Hollow. The sea fog rolled in thick along the asphalt, swallowing the edges of the world. It was the kind of place time forgot, where houses leaned a little to one side, the trees whispered secrets, and everything smelled faintly of salt and lavender. The old house on Willow Street appeared through the mist like a dream. Or a warning. 3 stories tall, painted in faded ivory with dark green shutters, the Victorian stood apart from its neighbors, quieter, more withdrawn. Its wraparound porch curled like a secret around the side, and its windows were tall and hollow-eyed, as if still waiting for someone who never came home. Kiera parked in the gravel drive, killed the engine, and sat for a moment, staring at her new beginning. The air was thick with petrichor and the hush of evening. The only sound was the slow ticking of the engine as it cooled. She exhaled. "You're not haunted," she said aloud to no one in particular. Then she got out and slammed the door. The key, left for her by the real estate agent in a rusty lockbox, fought her a little before turning. The front door creaked open with theatrical flair, revealing a hallway that smelled of wood polish, age, and something faintly floral. Dust motes swirled in shafts of amber light as the sun began to set behind the hills. Kiera stepped inside, the floorboards groaning in protest under her boots. The interior had clearly been preserved more than renovated. Ornate crown moldings, carved banisters, and wallpaper that whispered of decades past. Her boots echoed as she walked through the foyer and into the sitting room, where a grand, old piano loomed against the far wall. She touched one key. It responded with a low, ghostly note, startling her. "Okay, you're a little haunted," she murmured, half smiling. Boxes waited in the hallway. Unopened. Lifeless. A new chapter in cardboard. She ignored them for now and wandered through the rooms, letting the house introduce itself. A library lined with crooked shelves. A parlor with a stone hearth and velvet curtains that hadn't been drawn in years. And upstairs, rooms with beds made, as though guests were still expected. By nightfall, she lit candles and curled into a blanket on the antique sofa in the sitting room. The fireplace coughed, then bloomed to life. She sipped wine from a coffee mug and listened to the storm roll in. The house creaked and settled around her, and somewhere deep within, a sound like footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoed from the floor above. Kiera froze, breath catching. But after a moment, silence returned. She told herself it was the wind, or the pipes, or maybe just her imagination. Still, she found herself glancing toward the staircase, as though someone might be standing there. Later that night, in bed beneath unfamiliar sheets, she drifted off to the gentle, mournful sound of piano music faintly echoing down the hall. But she had touched no keys. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world washed and dripping, as though the sky had wrung itself out in exhaustion. Kiera awoke early, sunlight streaking across the high ceiling of her new bedroom, painting pale gold on the faded wallpaper. She stretched beneath the quilt, her breath clouding slightly in the cool air. The house felt still. Too still. She remembered the piano, those soft, deliberate notes echoing through the walls, and sat upright. For a moment, she questioned whether she'd dreamt it. But the unease lingered like smoke in the corners of her thoughts. With coffee in hand and determination in her spine, Kiera explored. The second floor was lined with doors. Bedrooms, mostly, some empty, some half-furnished like the owners had intended to return but never did. At the end of the hall, a narrow door stood half-concealed behind a standing mirror. Not on the blueprint. Not mentioned by the agent. It opened with the sound of old woods separating from time. Beyond it, a tight staircase led down, not to the basement, but into the west wing of the first floor. A space that felt tucked away intentionally. Forgotten. She followed the steps. The room at the bottom was dim, dust-laced, and thick with silence. A study, clearly, though one locked in the amber of another century. Heavy curtains blocked most of the light, and books lined the walls, some titles long out of print, others with cracked leather spines and no names at all. In the center sat a typewriter, its keys still dusted with the fine powder of time. Beside it, yellowing paper held down by a rusted fountain pen, and to the left, an ornate wooden desk framed by twin candelabras that looked like they hadn't been lit in decades. But it was the photograph that stopped her heart. Framed in silver and standing alone, it showed a young man in a three-piece suit, gazing directly into the lens with dark, intelligent eyes that held something unspoken. A sadness, maybe. A question. The inscription on the back was written in neat, slanted script. Henry Whitmore, 1927. Kiera stared at the name. Then back at the eyes. There was something disarming in his gaze, as though he could see her standing there. As if he were listening. "You lived here," she said quietly, unsure why she was speaking aloud. "You wrote in this room." She ran her fingers over the edges of the desk, brushing past the typewriter. A soft click startled her. One of the keys had depressed beneath her hand. She froze. There was no breeze in the room. No open window. She backed away, heart tapping a faster rhythm. But something kept her rooted. Curiosity bloomed against her caution. The air in the study was cool and still, but not unfriendly. If anything, it felt welcoming. A room not just forgotten, but waiting. Kiera set her coffee down on a dusty coaster and stood in front of the photograph once more. "Hello, Henry," she whispered. And for just a second, just long enough to question her own sanity, she swore she heard a page turn behind her. That night, the house felt different. Not louder, no slamming doors, no rattling pipes, no cliché hauntings, but more present, like it had turned to face her, listening now with careful attention. Kiera spent the afternoon unpacking, but her thoughts kept returning to the study, to the man in the photograph. Henry Whitmore. His name had a rhythm, a weight that lingered on her tongue like a half-remembered melody. She caught herself whispering it more than once. By twilight, the rooms had dimmed again, and shadows grew long across the hardwood. The storm had cleared the sky, revealing a bruised sunset fading into ink. Unable to resist, she returned to the study. This time, she came with candles. She lit two, one for the desk, one for the floor near the window, and then she sat in the armchair across from the typewriter, Henry's photograph now centered between them. The air was still, the scent of old paper and wax curling into the corners. She opened her journal, a soft leather-bound notebook she'd had for years, and began to write. At first, her words were mundane. What she unpacked, what she noticed about the house, the strangeness of the hidden staircase. But slowly, her tone shifted. She wasn't journaling anymore. She was talking. To him. "I don't know why this room feels different," she wrote. "Why you feel different. But I think you stayed here because you weren't finished. Writers never are." The candle flame flickered as if caught in a sudden breath. She looked up. Nothing. No draft. No window open. Just the steady thrum of her heart. Kiera closed the journal and reached for the photograph again. Her fingertips brushed the edge of the frame, and somewhere, softly, a whisper rose like a sigh. "Lonely." Her breath caught. She froze, heart hammering, eyes wide. The sound had been faint, almost imagined. But not quite. It hadn't come from outside. It had come from the walls, from the bones of the house itself. She whispered back without thinking. "Who's lonely?" Silence. Then, the gentle creak of the study's armchair. The one beside her. It had moved. Just an inch, as if someone had shifted to sit down. Kiera didn't scream. Didn't run. She simply sat very still, watching the space beside her, her skin prickling with a strange combination of fear and fascination. "I think you're still here," she said softly. The candle by the desk guttered low, then steadied. That night, she wrote more letters, almost. Not to anyone living, but to someone she felt. Her words spilled easily, fluid and trusting, as though something about the room made it impossible to lie. She wrote about grief, about the silence after heartbreak, about the ache of being seen and left anyway. And though the house made no sound, Kiera could feel it listening. She left the candles burning until they melted into stubs. When she finally rose to leave, she paused in the doorway and glanced back. The armchair was still angled toward her, as though he'd been listening too. The days passed with a strange rhythm, like time inside the house didn't quite move the way it should. Kiera found herself waking earlier, writing longer, and speaking more freely to the photograph of Henry in the study. She still hadn't played the piano again, not after that first eerie note. But sometimes in the deep folds of night, she heard faint melodies drifting through the halls. Simple, wistful tunes. A waltz in slow motion. Always gentle. Always sad. The locals in Merrow's Hollow remained tight-lipped about the house. When she mentioned the study or Henry's name, people changed the subject. One elderly man at the grocer's simply said, "If you start dreaming about music, leave before it finishes playing." Kiera laughed at the time. Now she wasn't so sure. It was late one evening when the storm came back, louder this time, angrier. Rain slapped the windows like open palms. The power blinked once, twice, and then surrendered completely. With a sigh, Kiera lit candles around the sitting room, their flames casting long shadows on the walls. The fireplace refused to catch, so she wrapped herself in a thick shawl and cranked up the old phonograph she'd found buried beneath a dusty sheet in the parlor closet. A vinyl sleeve lay inside it, labeled only, for E 1931. She placed the needle down. A soft crackle, then. Strings swelled through the room, followed by a graceful, lilting waltz. Slow. Melancholy. The music felt like something remembered rather than heard, tugging gently at her ribs. Without thinking, she moved to the center of the room. And then she felt it. A hand. Not cold. Not clawed. Nothing theatrical. Just a presence, warm and careful, taking hers, guiding it upward. She gasped but didn't pull away. It was ridiculous, impossible. No one was there. And yet, someone was dancing with her. She moved, and the air moved with her. Around her, a phantom form brushing her waist, fingers resting lightly at the base of her spine. She twirled once, off balance, and caught herself laughing, high and breathless, half in disbelief. "Henry," she whispered. The name came naturally now, like a thread she had followed too far to unwind. The music spun gently toward its end. And as the last notes faded, the presence loosened its hold, slowly, reluctantly. Then it was gone. The room was still. Kiera stood in the candlelight, flushed and wide-eyed, her chest rising and falling as though she'd run a mile. Her hand trembled slightly where it hovered in midair. It had felt real. Not like a vision, not a trick of grief or fantasy. She knew the weight of it, the intention. And worst of all, or maybe most beautiful, she had felt safe. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in the study and wrote by candlelight, her pen moving with more urgency than ever before. She wrote of the music, of the dance, of the way her body had remembered a partner it never knew. And when she looked up at Henry's photograph, she could have sworn. The edges of his mouth had changed. Not quite a smile, but close. Kiera began to walk the town more, if only to remind herself she still belonged to the living. But the outside world had shifted. Or maybe it was her that had changed. The people of Merrow's Hollow watched her differently now. Sideways glances, polite nods that ended too quickly, as though her very presence stirred something better left buried. At the corner cafe, the waitress who once made small talk now avoided her eyes. When Kiera mentioned her house on Willow Street, the woman's smile cracked. "Just you in that place?" she asked, too casually. Kiera nodded. "Just me." A pause. Then, "Be careful. That house remembers things." Before Kiera could ask what she meant, the waitress vanished into the kitchen. That evening, the fog returned. It clung to the windows like breath, swallowing the edges of the yard, the street, the sky. Inside, Kiera sat on the floor of the study, surrounded by open books and loose papers. She had begun reading Henry's old journals, found locked in the lower drawer of the desk, untouched, waiting. His handwriting was elegant but hard-pressed, as though each word was earned. His thoughts spilled like someone trying to outpace the darkness in his mind. "She's slipping through my hands. The house can't hold her, no matter how tightly I write her into its walls. If she leaves, I won't follow. I'll remain. That's the promise. Kiera turned the pages with growing unease. It was clear he had loved someone. Obsessively. Desperately. Who was she? A name kept surfacing, Evelyn. That night, unable to rest, Kiera climbed to the third floor, the level she'd avoided since moving in. She passed unused bedrooms, storage closets, until she found a locked door at the end of the hall. The key from the desk drawer fit perfectly. The room was frozen in time. Dusty lace curtains. A narrow bed. A perfume bottle left uncapped on the vanity, the scent long gone. And on the wall, a painting, a woman in a blue dress, turned only slightly toward the viewer. The plaque read, Evelyn Harrow, 1931. Her beauty was haunting. Sharp cheekbones, intelligent eyes. Familiar, somehow. Kiera stepped back. Her head spun. This was the woman Henry had written about. The one the house had mourned. The one who had vanished, whose name had been erased from every town record after her mysterious death. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the room. Kiera jumped, heart racing, but there was no one at the door. Only silence. Then she heard it, soft and urgent, a whisper threaded through the walls. Leave him. Leave this place. The air turned cold. The window rattled in its frame. Shadows bled longer across the floor. Kiera backed out of the room, slamming the door shut behind her. Later, she sat again in the study, clutching Henry's journal to her chest. The candlelight danced, but offered no comfort now. Who are you really? She whispered. But the photograph said nothing. And for the first time, the study felt like a cage. Kiera didn't sleep. She stayed in the study long after the candles burned down to puddles, Henry's journal open on her lap, her thoughts spiraling. The whispers had stopped, but a pressure remained in the air, like the house itself was holding its breath. By morning, she made a decision. She needed answers that weren't in the house. She drove to the town library, a squat stone building with ivy strangling its windows and a front desk manned by a woman in horn-rimmed glasses and a wool cardigan thick enough to withstand winter. Kiera introduced herself, hesitated, then asked about Henry Whitmore. The librarian's mouth flattened. The writer? Yes. He lived in the house I just moved into. The woman hesitated, then pulled a thin file from the town archive drawers. Dust puffed into the air. Newspaper clippings. Death notices. Faded photographs. Kiera sorted through them with trembling hands. The official record was sparse. Henry Whitmore, reclusive novelist. Declared missing in 1932. No funeral, no burial, just the word vanished. There was one headline that caught her breath. Tragedy at Whitmore House. Fiancé falls to her death. The article was brief and bloodless. Evelyn Harrow, 27, was found in the garden, neck broken, eyes open. No foul play suspected. Henry was never seen again. No one had looked too closely. And no one had ever left that house since. That evening, Kiera walked the garden. It was wilder now, overtaken by ivy and ghost roses, but the outline remained. The arched trellis, the worn flagstone path. She stood beneath the rusted balcony, directly below her own bedroom. The same balcony Evelyn had fallen from. Or jumped. Or been pushed. A gust of wind whispered through the hedges, carrying the scent of rain and something older. She looked up. For a split second, in the flickering twilight, she saw a figure standing at the railing. Slim. Dressed in blue. Watching her. But when she blinked, it was gone. Back inside, Kiera stormed into the study and yanked open drawers. Beneath loose pages and crumbling ink wells, she found a small velvet box. Inside, a ring. Antique. Delicate. An engagement ring. Evelyn's. She set it down and turned to the photograph of Henry on the desk. You lied, she said, voice shaking. You didn't just lose her. Something happened. Something wrong. The room didn't answer. Then, across the study, the portrait cracked. A thin, splintering line appeared across the glass of Henry's photograph, from the top corner, slicing straight through his mouth. Kiera stepped back. The house groaned, deep in its bones. And then, faintly, clearly, from just beside her ear. It wasn't me. She whirled, but the study was empty. Only the sound of the clock ticking. Only her breath, sharp and unsteady in the quiet. Later that night, she sat by the fireplace, Evelyn's ring clutched tight in her fist, Henry's journal resting in her lap. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the house was waiting. She knew now, She wasn't the first to fall in love here. But she might be the first to survive it. It happened during the third storm of June. Lightning cracked the sky like a fractured mirror, and the house, Kiera's fragile, breathing house, shivered with it. The power had gone again, leaving only flickering candles and the dull roar of rain beating against the windows like it was trying to get in. Kiera sat in the study, Evelyn's ring beside the typewriter, Henry's journal open to the final page. She had read every word he'd written. The dissent, the grief, the longing, and near the end, scrawled in a different hand, shakier, more frantic than the rest. I begged her not to go to the balcony. I never meant to hold on so tight. The truth was layered between lines. Henry hadn't killed Evelyn, but he had kept her. Too long, too hard, until she shattered. And now he was doing it again. Kiera set down the journal and stared into the candlelight. I need to see you, she said softly. Not your words. Not your voice in the walls. You. If you ever loved me, let me see you. For a long time, nothing answered. Then the air shifted. The candle flames bent, not out, but inward toward the center of the room. A hush fell like a snowfall, and the shadows moved. Not suddenly, not theatrically, but with grace. And there he was. Henry. Not translucent. Not cold. Just there. As if the light had finally decided to remember him. He stood near the fireplace, his clothes faded and old-fashioned, hair tousled, his dark eyes filled with a sorrow that time had not softened. He looked like the photograph, but softer, more haunted. Kiera didn't scream. Her eyes welled, but her voice was steady. Why me? Henry took a slow step forward. His voice, when it came, was smoke and silk. Because you weren't afraid. You listened. You stayed. She swallowed. You let Evelyn fall. He flinched, as if the name itself had weight. She wanted to leave. I couldn't. I thought if I wrote her into the house, into my words, she'd stay. He looked at her then, not just looked, but saw her. But you're not like her. You love me, but you'd still walk away. You would let me go. Kiera rose from the chair. Her hands trembled at her sides. I don't know if I love you, she said honestly. Not the way you want. Not after this. Henry gave the faintest of smiles. That's why I have to let you choose. Silence stretched between them. Kiera reached toward him. Her fingers met his chest and passed through like wind through curtains. But for 1 second she felt warmth. Not flesh, not bone, but the memory of a heartbeat. I wish we met at the wrong time, she whispered. Henry's eyes glistened. We did. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, the fire flared one last time, then dimmed as if exhaling. And where Henry had stood, only air. Kiera sank into the armchair, Evelyn's ring still on the desk, the candles burning low. The house was quieter now. Not just still, but unburdened. As if the weight it had carried for nearly a century had finally been lifted. She wiped her cheeks and whispered, not to the shadows, but to herself. Goodbye, Henry. And for the first time since moving in, the house said nothing back. Morning came like forgiveness. The storm had passed, leaving puddles in the garden and dew clinging to the windows like tiny glass ghosts. For the first time since Kiera moved in, sunlight filled the house without hesitation. It warmed the wood floors, touched the banisters, and danced across the walls of the study like a welcome back. But Henry was gone. Not lost. Not trapped. Gone. She knew it the way you know when a bird has flown from its cage. The silence is different. Lighter. Open. Kiera stood at the desk where she had first whispered his name. The photograph was still there, cracked across the glass. His eyes stared out, but they were only paper now. The weight behind them had lifted. Beside it, the typewriter sat quietly. She rolled in a fresh sheet of paper. No whisper followed. No keys moved on their own. Just the soft click of her own fingers, one after another, pressing gently into the silence. She typed his name, Henry Whitmore. Then a title, The Echo Between Walls. It would be his story. And hers. And Evelyn's. Not a ghost story, exactly. More like a love letter to letting go. That afternoon, she packed the last of her boxes. Not to leave, but to make room. The house no longer felt like it belonged to someone else. It was hers now, not a prison or a secret, but a place with memory in its bones and light in its windows. In the garden, she placed Evelyn's ring beneath the roses. A quiet return. A peace offering. And as she turned to go back inside, she thought she heard something, soft and far away. A piano note. Just one. She smiled. Kiera sat on the porch that evening, the sea air cool on her skin, a mug of tea between her hands. She didn't speak to the shadows anymore. She didn't need to. But sometimes, when the breeze curled just right through the old wind chimes, she imagined someone still listening. Not trapped. Not waiting. Just remembering. Like her.